Here's another Pinoy you'll be proud to know about. Rome Nichols has his story.
Carlos Arnaiz is not your typical construction guy. He is an architect, but not your average run-of-the-mill architect. He holds a master's degree with honors from Harvard University's Graduate School of Design. He is the founder of a fast-growing design studio in Brooklyn, New York, called CASA, which stands for Carlos Arnaiz Architects. Carlos is also an educator, a writer, and an urban design consultant. These days, several times a year, he can be seen on-site, working hands-on in his many projects in the Philippines. December 2012 was the launch of CASA's first project in the Philippines, the Church of 100 Walls, which is now officially named the Chapel of San Pedro Calungsod, the Cebuano saint canonized that same year.
It was a church that was commissioned by the Cebu parish to mark this important historic moment, and it accommodates about 1,500 people. In that project, we really explored what the notion of a church is for the future. We wanted to communicate some of the values of openness, inclusivity.
Since the 100 Walls Church, Carlos and CASA have moved on to build an eclectic mix of architectural gems all over the Philippines. There's a hospital in Baler, Quezon, a hotel in Boracay, a house in Batangas, another church in Laguna, and most recently, CASA completed the City Center Tower, a 30-story office building in bustling Fort Bonifacio Global City.
I've always wanted to give something back, and the timing in a way was perfect in that as I was starting my architecture business and opened my studio here in New York, it also happened that the Philippines was really growing, and it still is very much growing. It's going through this wonderful explosive development, a kind of a new wave of economic prosperity, and I felt we had something positive to contribute.
Although he can't really say what his most favorite project is, Carlos's passion for each of his designs is obvious in the way he talks about them.
We created a building that's in a way a conversation between the traditional, solid, modernist, classical, gridded building of the 1950s that then meets a much more softer, organic, in a way almost like a feminine side, which is the parabola that opens up the building and creates these sky terraces where people can come out and commune with nature.
Some observers say Carlos and his team are changing the landscape of the Philippines. Although he says to make change in a good way is one of his motivations, he qualifies that statement.
There's so much of the Philippines landscape that's inspiring and should be preserved and needs to be incorporated in this growth. And that's one of the aspects that I see as a responsibility for our profession, is that in this march forward during a period of rapid development where things are getting built and sometimes things are getting torn down and things are being transformed, that as architects, designers, we need to also think about how we incorporate the local story. In the office, we've coined this term for some of our work in the Philippines. We call it tribal futurism. That it's a relationship to deep and rich tribal traditions, weaving fabrics, dance, music, but then bringing it into a kind of sci-fi modern future. I hope that's what we're trying to do. Yeah, that's what we're...
Carlos, thank you so much for bringing us to your home.
Yeah, you're most welcome.
Your home. Can you tell us a little bit about it?
We moved here about 7 years ago. We fell in love with this neighborhood called Fort Greene. This house was built in 1895, roughly the same time as the Brooklyn Bridge. We love to cook, so the kitchen is very much part of the dining room, and the kids run around here.
Carlos and his wife Elizabeth have two young sons, Luca and Tomas. His wife is also a very successful architect.
She grew up in the United States, of Brazilian mother and American father, and she works at an agency called the Economic Development Corporation, which is one of the most important public agencies in New York.
Carlos himself has mixed parentage. His father is Spanish-Filipino and his mother is Colombian.
They met in Spain in the early 70s. They fell in love and then they moved back to the Philippines. My dad got a job and I was born in the Philippines there. Then, and my mom lived in the Philippines for over 20 years. And then my mom also got very involved in the politics of the Philippines during the People Power Revolution. And as a result of that, in a way, as a homage to all the time and the dedication she gave to the country, Corazon Aquino appointed her the honorary consul of the Philippines to Colombia, where she now resides.
Carlos lived in Manila until he was 18 years old. He studied at Xavier, then to the International School for High School. He came to the United States for his college education.
Two pieces of my childhood will never leave me, two pieces of the Philippines. One is having been a youngster and having experienced the People Power Revolution. To me, that was really unforgettable. That was a really inspiring event. That's, I think, is one reason why I'm very interested in social change, in politics. And the second part was the part of the connection to nature. In the Philippines, I was always going outdoors, and I was also a very avid scuba diver and would go a lot to Batangas. And to me, that connection to the natural beauty of the Philippines, the 7,000 islands, they say, and the coral reefs was something that I'll never forget. And I think it's impacted a lot my own aesthetic sense and the visual obsessions I have.
Carlos's dad still lives in the Philippines. Every time he visits or works on his projects, he sees the country's glaring urban problems.
Philippines is really in an exciting but dangerous position with respect to its development. It's growing very fast, which is wonderful, but that growth brings with it the need to plan and the need to design our communities in a more holistic, inclusive way that really takes care of the individual and the civic needs. I think leadership is what's needed. The private sector, I think, is quite strong in the Philippines. We have very large corporations that have big land holdings that are very active and progressive. But I think the public sector needs to also step in and say, wait a minute, this is a two-handed game. Traffic is the tip of the iceberg. I think sometimes people obsess about traffic, but you can't solve traffic without solving other urban issues. New York is an interesting story and perhaps can teach us some lessons in the case of Manila, where if you think about it, 20, 30 years ago, people were abandoning New York. Dumbo, this place is now so vibrant and alive, was empty. It was a very scary place. In recapturing the urban story of New York began to revitalize its older neighborhoods and realized that instead of spreading outwards, they should go in and renovate and recycle and adaptive reuse, older buildings. And I think that's one of the interesting parts that Manila could learn today. You see in Manila today there's expansion north and south, and but then you look at the old parts of Manila and parang they're just being left alone. People's commutes are getting longer, 1 hour, 2 hours in a car. That's terrible. That's unproductive and that's unsustainable in the long term. Another lesson's the waterfront. This waterfront here 5-6 years ago was totally inaccessible. Now you have picnics, people in the summer, kids running around. Manila is a city on the water. And I think you sometimes forget that the waterways of Manila, the Pasig River, can be turned into recreational civic spaces for people.
Aside from the Philippines, CASA also has ongoing projects in China, Costa Rica, Colombia, Peru, and of course, New York. How does he juggle work with family life?
I try to keep certain things sacred. Dinner with the children is a sacred thing. Taking them to school in the morning is something that I try to do as much as possible. Weekends with the children is something that my wife and I invest a lot of time in and make sure that that's preserved.
Success as an architect may have seemed an impossible dream to Carlos less than a decade ago. When the housing bubble burst and recession hit America in 2008, he lost his job. Today, with CASA very much a global design studio, workshop, and think tank, Carlos Arnaiz did not only bounce back, he's breaking glass ceilings.
The big players here are players that have been in this industry for generations. Their fathers were developers, and it's a very close-knit community. And being an outsider, being a foreigner, it's not so easy. It's a challenge to enter into that. And I've slowly been making inroads, but I think that glass ceiling certainly exists. It's breakable. It's not impenetrable, but it takes time and work and perseverance and persistence.
No matter how busy Carlos Arnaiz has become with his construction projects in many parts of the globe, he manages to devote a good chunk of his time to teaching.
One of the things I really cherish about teaching is that it forces the teacher to take a stance on what they believe about their profession.
What's the most important lesson that you make it a point to teach them that you don't want any of your students to forget about architecture?
Passion. It's really about passion. I think you have to love this. You have to love this profession, and you have to believe that love can transform itself into the ability to make a difference.
Surprisingly, Carlos Arnaiz can be employed by virtually anybody. He doesn't pick projects based on scale or budget.
I think it's all about the client's vision and whether the client's vision is something I believe in, and if there's a spark with the client, I think that's the most important thing. To me, good architecture can only be produced with a good client. The common misconception is they think they want to know that I'm only doing one kind of thing, and they're usually surprised that, wow, you do a church, and then you do a hotel, and then you also do a hospital, and then you do a small house. I have to admit that if I was only thinking about money, I would just do one type of project because it's efficient, you can repeat it, cookie cutter, simple, you don't, less labor, less time, but that's not what drives me.